The new exhibit exploits a concept that always seems fertile for a spooky story: inanimate humanoid figures coming to life. Charles Beaumont is credited as the writer here, but that's not exactly true. Did this script, combined with a comeback of perhaps the best Twilight Zone director and a familiar face returning to star, make for a Season 4 winner? Martin Lombard Senescu is the curator of the Murderer's Row exhibit at Ferguson's Wax Museum. He goes to great lengths to care for the wax visages of some of history's most well-known killers. Senescu leads tourist groups with a sense of pride and a clear emotional attachment to the figures themselves. Mr. Ferguson, the owner, tells Martin that the facility will be shut down immediately as they aren't making enough money to continue. Devastated, Martin lobbies to take the wax figures of the murderers home, hoping to care for them until they're purchased by an appropriate buyer. To his wife's dismay, Senescu has all 5 shipped to his basement, where he acquires an air conditioner and runs up their bills for weeks. Martin planned on opening his own museum, but he was unable to find an investor, and the Senescus have run out of money. His wife, Emma, goes to her brother Dave for help. He spots her some cash and suggests Emma break the air conditioner so the figures will melt and Martin will finally go out and get another job. The husband's obsession with maintaining the sculptures have put a large wedge between the couple, so Emma decides to go through with her brother's plan. However, when she sneaks into the basement late one night, the figures prove to be more than just a frightening sight. The new exhibit is a ghoulish angle for a TZ story to take, at least in the overt sense of the themes directly dealing with murder and murderers. The script itself is pretty decent in my opinion. What brings it up a few notches are the direction, visuals, and performances. John Bram directed his only Season 4 episode, putting a heavy focus on George T. Clemens' uncanny cinematography and the acting skills of a returning Martin Balsam. There isn't much in the way of flashy camera tricks here. Most of the creepiness comes from how they lit the actors playing the wax figures. The makeup jobs on them helped too. Effective still images were used for the close-ups of these guys, but for most of the full body shots, I have no idea how they were able to remain that still. I'm 99% sure the majority of those wider angles still feature the actors, but they barely move. There are only a few shots where we do see movement, which makes me think the costumes had some kind of frame built into them so we wouldn't see the usual slight shifting like in Elegy or Still Valley. However Bram and the production team pulled it off, it's damn impressive. The small expression and lighting changes to David Bond as Jack the Ripper are just freaky. Martin Balsam gives us an understated, unhinged turn as Senescu. He plays it straight, and that totally works for this character. There are just a few moments when we see this dude go off.
Get away from there! Those figures are not to be touched.
You've been around those wax dummies for so long, you've forgotten how to be a human being.
No! What kind of a friend do you think I am? I can't desert them now. After all these years, they need me. They'd be lost without me.
Otherwise, he's making small talk with the wax figures and having fairly civil conversations with his wife. I think that added to the intrigue of what was really going on here. This was his last part in the original show, but Balsam would later act in a couple episodes of the 80s Twilight Zone series. Will Kaluva was the other prominent returning player as Mr. Ferguson, while Marcel Hilaire, Milton Parsons, and Robert McCord previously turned up in credited and uncredited roles. Maggie Mahoney, aka Margaret Field, did a fine job as Martin's understanding but creeped out wife. If she looks familiar, it's because she's Sally Field's mom. The resemblance is pretty strong there. William Mims plays the sort of wise guy brother-in-law well enough. I think both he and Maggie's best moments were their shocked faces when they saw the figures move. Charles Beaumont is credited as the new exhibit's writer, but it was actually his friend Jerry Soule who penned the entire script. A mix of Beaumont's advancing illness and an overwhelming amount of deadlines led to Soule taking over. Beaumont had the initial idea for the story and collaborated on the plot with his friend before Soule was given full reign. They split the payment 50-50, but this kind of uncredited arrangement wasn't allowed by the Writers Guild, so officially, no one knew Soule was ghostwriting for Beaumont. Jerry was invited to the set when this episode was shot, and John Bram was said to have thrown his arm around Beaumont, saying, "Chuck, you've done it again," right in front of the teleplay's real scribe. This wasn't the first time Chuck used a ghostwriter. O.C. Rich actually wrote Beaumont's Season 3 script, Dead Man's Shoes, and Soule would be brought back in the same role twice more the following season. After Emma and Dave are murdered by the wax figures and Martin buries the evidence, Mr. Ferguson shows up to tell his former employee that the sculptures have been purchased by Marchand's Wax Museum in Brussels. Disappointed, Sinescu runs upstairs to make some tea while Ferguson takes a few measurements for shipping purposes. The figure of Henri Desiré Landru then springs to life and chokes Ferguson to death with the rope in its hands. Martin soon discovers the scene and finally snaps on his lifeless friends, vowing to destroy them. But before he can strike, they all slowly begin to move toward their caretaker.
No, Martin Sinescu, it was you. You murdered your wife.
It was you who used my axe to kill your wife's brother.
No!
You are the murderer. You killed them all.
No!
We dissolve to Marchand's Wax Museum, where a tour guide highlights the murderous wax figures, ending with a depiction of Martin himself. Sinescu is said to have killed his wife, brother-in-law, and boss, forever living on as a monster, just as infamous as the real men behind the sculptures he looked after. I very much enjoyed the new exhibit. It's got a slower pace, but I don't believe that affected the story since Martin's slow decline worked well in the hour format. Our villains rarely moved, making the scenes when they did more suspenseful. Their blank stares and minute expression changes do quite a bit to instill a sense of silent terror. The Martin character spoke early on about the hell of living with an uncontrollable urge to kill, and how these murderers are immortalized when regular good people are forgotten.
To take a life with your hands, again and again, and not be able to stop oneself. Can you begin to imagine the horror of that? Future generations will know, or he'll be here, immortalized in wax, remembered, as you and I will never be.
This is likely foreshadowing since the script directly tells us Martin was the killer all along. I'm not fully convinced of that though. As screwed up as Sinescu's actions were, it would probably be an even darker twist that these sentient wax dummies really murdered those people. Think about it. They forced Martin to cover it up, killed him, and now he's remembered for the rest of human history as one of them. That just seems even more twisted. Plus, it would make Sinescu's final admonishment of his pals more desperate and tragic.
You murdered Mr. Ferguson. He was the only man who was my friend. He was my best friend. I'll break you into little pieces. I'll turn up the heat so that you melt down into little pools of wax.
This one is a definite recommendation. Its premise is hard to forget and unsettling from multiple perspectives. Give it a look, but be certain what's peering back isn't a dead-eyed evil that can only be found in the Twilight Zone.
Who knows what evil lurks in the heart of the man standing next to you?
The shadow knows.